All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cincy Source. This is one of our foundation forums for blindness for Cincinnati and surrounding areas. I'm Michelle Glaze, Director of Professional Outreach for the Foundation Fighting Blindness, global leader in driving retinal degenerative disease research. I am really excited about tonight's Cincy Source. Many of you may know that back in May, the Foundation Fighting Blindness launched a mental health initiative, including a new mental health resource center on the Foundation webpage. If you haven't visited, I encourage you to go to fightingblindness.org and take a look at the mental health resource center. Skim around, listen. There's a lot of information there. There are some educational videos, there are some patient testimonies, there are some webinars that have been recorded. There's a list of mental health professionals who are willing and able to assist those of us with vision loss through our journey. They've received some special training in the area of blindness and vision loss in order to be a little bit more impactful and well-rounded in their approaches to working with individuals in our community. So check that out. I'd also like to highlight that our professional outreach team is going to be hosting a mental health focused webinar for eye care professionals. That will be on November 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We do have 3 presenters, and it is a webinar that's titled Seeing Beyond Vision Loss. And it is focused on mental health resources for patients with retinal diseases. We've got 3 different individuals, a patient perspective, a retina specialist perspective, and the perspective of a clinical psychologist. Jessie Walensky will be joining us. She's a blindness advocate in the field. She's going to be sharing a little bit about her personal journey with vision loss and how it has impacted her mental health. We'll hear from Sandeep Grover, who is a retina specialist from the University of Florida at Jacksonville. And then we'll be hearing from Ann Wagner, who is a clinical psychologist who also happens to have vision loss. So a very robust array of presenters, and we're excited about that 1-hour free webinar. We encourage you to share it with your networks and invite people to join us. Our next Cincy Source will be in January. We do hold these meetings on a quarterly basis, and they are typically virtual. So invite a friend to join our next Cincy Source. We will be and are recording this session this evening. So we will disseminate the recording along with any additional information that surfaces during this meeting today to all participants and previous attendees. You can also visit the Cincy Source webpage to find local area resources, previous recordings, and other information that may be helpful in working with and sharing information with individuals who have vision loss. So with all of that, I am going to introduce Jim Shirk and turn things over to Jim. Jim is our VP of the Cincinnati chapter of the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and he'll be introducing our presenter tonight. So Jim, take it over.
Thank you, Michelle. Just a quick intro on myself. I am the Vice President of our local chapter of the Foundation Fighting Blindness. I do have retinitis pigmentosa. Was diagnosed, almost 30 years ago. So I belong to that inherited retinal disease club. And as Michelle mentioned, mental health awareness is something that has been a focus of late. And so we're delighted to have Dr. Jennifer Farley participate in the Cincy Source Forum this evening. So a brief bio on Dr. Farley. She is a clinical psychologist at the Linder Center of Hope, where she began when their doors opened 17 years ago. If you're not familiar with the Linder Center of Hope, it's located in Mason, Ohio, and it's nationally recognized as one of the leading mental health facilities in the country. At the Linder Center, Dr. Farley is the Associate Chief of Psychology and is also the Director of Clinical Neuropsychology. She specializes in the testing of children, adolescents, and young adults, as well as provides therapy for patients of all ages. And she is most gratified in helping her patients overcome anxiety, depression, life stress and adjustments, and relational trauma. So with that, I will turn this over to Dr. Jennifer Farley.
Thank you, Jim. Well, hello, everybody. I don't know where to start from that. So as Jim said, I've been working at the Linder Center almost my whole professional career. I started actually at the University of Cincinnati, and I knew when the Linder Center of Hope was going to be opening, it was going to be not that far from my home, and it was convenient, but amazing that we have this big resource here at the center. We do lots of different kinds of services from inpatient. So when you think of someone who's really struggling on a very acute crisis basis, and they just really need stabilization, we have 2 inpatient units there. And then we have a residential facility, which is, it can be acute, but it's really for people who are not necessarily in a current crisis, but are seeking a multidisciplinary assessment to help clarify diagnoses. This could be from trauma, depression, is this bipolar disorder? How much of this may be related to a medical condition versus effects of substance use or alcoholism? So there's a very comprehensive residential unit that is generally about a 10-day stay, but some people stay longer for, let's say, specialized treatments such as OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That's a specialization there on that unit. And then, of course, we have a lot of outpatient services. And so when we think of probably mental health, most people seek outpatient services. And this is probably the fastest growing part of our center. We keep adding therapists, whether it's, well, right now we've run out of space. We're currently building and expanding, which is very exciting, but it means that some of us are off-site at a different location that we actually love for the temporary site that it is. But what's neat about this is that we've grown with just people serving people who come for individual therapy, as well as, and that's across all ages. We have people even testing for children as young as like 2 or 3 for autism, spectrum disorder, and then we go through the whole developmental stage. I'm pretty fortunate myself. I really never sought to work at a children's hospital. You know, Cincinnati has an excellent children's hospital system, but once somebody reaches a certain age, they kind of get kicked out of the system. The hope is that they then obviously have to transfer to adult care. So where I've been at the Linder Center, I've been able to work with kids at adolescents, young adults and adults. I even see some people into their 60s and 70s. And so it's just neat to be able to provide a whole gamut between certainly individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy, for lots of different kinds of reasons too, which is really nice. That's what I think what draws a lot of us to our profession, and especially enjoying working at the Linder Center, is that we get to do a lot of different things. Every day is a little bit different. And in my experience too, I also have a background in working with health conditions. And so I did some work in my training at Dayton Children's Hospital, but more on the medical floor. And I think that's where my passion for even like health psychology came into play, just knowing, well, how do we apply psychology to medical conditions, like even people who would be on the floor and having to get a PICC line. If any of you are familiar with any loved one or even yourself who's ever needed something like that, it can be really, really hard, especially on kids, but of any age, certainly for medical procedures. And so they would pull some of us from the psychology team to the medical floor. So I've always had a passion for understanding even just medical conditions. Back early in my years, I had this interest in even working with children who had children, adolescents, young adults, even with diabetes, because there could be such a mismanagement of insulin, especially if they have type 2 diabetes. But just understanding, well, what does it take to treat this and to basically take care of myself? And when you think of developmentally, where someone's at in life, how managing their medical condition can be, there can be a lot of barriers with it, if you will, even with one's own identity development. And where I look at that too is just understanding when anyone is diagnosed with something that's going to be much more chronic and not just temporary, there involves adjustment to that, and especially grief. Being diagnosed with something obviously that's permanent that you have to adapt to, and it's like letting go of what you have appreciated, right? And so maybe not necessarily appreciated, but you appreciate it more when then it's threatened. And so with that, then I've seen, and we've seen in terms of outpatient especially, is people who come in for individual therapy, even at different times of their life with different transitions. It's kind of neat for me when I see somebody like they start seeing me in junior high, and then I see them through high school. I have a license, and some of us do have licenses at the Linder Center where psychologists, we can belong to something called PsyPact. And with that, that means that any state that has been approved or allowed legislature for PsyPact to be a part of that state, it means that we can be in Ohio and then provide therapy to people in those different states. So it is very feasible for me to see somebody in high school and then they go off to college. I have seen somebody in North Carolina. They didn't want to stop services, which is what we typically did before, because of college counseling centers. And even though I am a big fan of college counseling centers for what they know, in that example, of resources for college students, it's neat when people don't have to quit their therapist to see someone else. So what's neat is that we get to see people in all those, most states are a part of that. And so then it's just exciting if people go to Florida for the winter or somewhere else, Arizona. It's neat that then mental health does not have to be postponed, put on pause, that people can continue to be seen, which is exciting. So individually, then certainly we see a lot of people see couples, and even in the context of family therapy, there is also group therapy that serves its own function, which is just the concept of universality, which is being a part of a group and working through and learning how to work through and cope with things, and knowing that you're not alone in doing so, and just being able to connect with others by the stories that people share and how they're growing and learning, and maybe what they're still struggling with, of course. Let's see, when I see couples, again, a variety of reasons, but it's not uncommon for couples to seek out therapy to just adjust to something. And people don't have to necessarily experience like a severe depression or anxiety, or suffer from like a very severe form of, let's say, OCD, or something like that. There's actually quite a lot of people we see with what we would consider like an adjustment disorder. It just means that somebody is experiencing maybe some sadness, some anxiety, but it's specific to a particular stressor. And so thankfully, that's what's kind of great about a lot of people who've sought therapy, especially since COVID. I think COVID, that being such a universal experience for everybody, to see what that experience did for how it affected people's mental health, how it affected socialization, and how it increased a lot of loneliness. And so it really opened the doors for breaking down barriers for mental health, for people to seek that out. And so there was a lot of people who started therapy during COVID, even just to work through the adjustment of doing so. And so it's not that somebody has to wait until something's really, really severe for them to seek therapy. There's a lot of people I see who they can function fairly well honestly, it's just working through whatever it is. And it could be maybe that the person really is kind of okay, but when you think about like a partnership, a marriage, and just the adjustments. So someone might be on their own path of adjusting to something, but then their spouse might be in a whole different kind of timeline. And so sometimes it just creates some conflict of just understanding and communication. And so that's where oftentimes couples can seek out therapy to manage those kinds of things. And then certainly family therapy. And it doesn't have to involve like kids. We've seen families where there might be adult children caring or supporting their older parents. A lot of family dynamics still play out in adulthood, especially as the holidays are coming up. So there's a lot of support to be sought at times. But especially with, with vision, like, I guess I look at it in terms of even just more broadly of just like a medical condition of what someone has to adjust to. And it's not just one person, it's the spouse, it's the whole family, really, at any age of trying to adapt to something and looking at resources, looking at what is realistic, what can be still hoped for, what can be compensated for, and also then, of course, like what to let go of. What does life look like that's different that now we have to adapt to? So there's of course all those services that we have at the Linder Center. There's also what I didn't talk about is like sometimes after acute care in residential or in inpatient, it's common for people to not quite be completely okay to just go home and be fully functional. And so there's what we call like step down care, which is what we call partial hospitalization. If any of you guys have ever heard of what partial hospitalization is, it's people who attend like classes or groups throughout the day at the center. And they have these at different hospitals in the area as well, but it's where people at least have the structure. They can stay at home, but then they have the structure of going to somewhere and being under therapeutic care during the day and seeing a psychiatrist and groups and therapy and that sort of thing. There's even care called like intensive outpatient therapy, and that's usually maybe about 3 times a week. Now this is more geared towards people who are entering back into the daily life that they have. And so this is much more typically what we call IOPs happen in the evenings. And so even at the Linder Center, there's a specific IOP for eating disorders. There's a specific IOP for substance use, so what we call co-occurring disorders. So it's very common for people who struggle with alcoholism, drug abuse of some kind to also have another mental health disorder that is usually either masked or like somebody would have adapted, like what we call self-medicating by using alcohol or drugs to escape from whatever mood or distress that they were experiencing. So it's very common. Also, even with people who just like use, of course, that to escape, but then the after effects is that sometimes then depression can be brought on by substance use, anxiety can as well. And so there's a specific IOP for that. And those programs occur in the evenings, usually about 3 times a week for about 3 hours a session. So it's nice. And then those occur in the evenings. So it offers a little bit more of a structure for people who are still struggling, where a weekly therapy or every other week won't really satisfy the support that they would need. But like I said, most people at the center, when they seek us out, it's for the outpatient services, especially individual therapy, marital therapy, group therapy, family therapy, with just the wide gamut and the wide gamut of a lot of different conditions and a lot of things that people might struggle with. So
Wonderful.
does anybody
Thank you so much for that overview. This is Michelle. I wanted to ask a question, if that's okay.
I welcome that. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks,
You know,
Michelle.
I'm curious. We often, as a professional outreach team, we talk with eye care professionals about how important it is for a holistic approach to care for patients with a blinding eye condition, right? Not just the medical piece, right? But we also need to be connected to resources and different services and support organizations to help us not only understand our medical diagnosis, but also to help with different things that we need to adapt to daily living and to live and thrive independently and to have those social engagements, etc. Um,
Absolutely.
and I didn't share with you, but I have retinitis pigmentosa as well. So I speak about us because I'm part of this community. But I think that mental health is something that is not always an initial, referral
Mm,
piece in the
hmm.
medical community. Can you talk a little bit about when you do have patients come to you who have a blinding eye condition? How often is it long after their initial diagnosis? And do you have any ideas or thoughts around how the eye
Mm,
care community can kind of bridge that gap, right, between initial diagnosis and getting patients to all of the
absolutely.
resources they need?
Yeah, I think, boy, holistic is the word, isn't it? And I think it takes some people who are more, there's like holistic medicine, and I think people, at least the providers who are more aware that this is not so compartmentalized, right? Like there's some clinicians out there, I think in any kind of profession where any kind of area, they might be so focused on just one aspect, and this is the diagnosis, but I need you to go somewhere else to look at whatever else might be going on. So I think part of the education is just understanding this. Certainly, I think like a biopsychosocial model is what we've been trained on, and just looking holistically with that. And I think some people are better informed than others. Um, I think I think one question that you had so is like maybe what the typical experience is between diagnosis and when somebody might be seeking therapy to adapt to that. I don't think that there's one answer for that. I think it really just depends on more about the the clinical team that person has. I think when somebody sees a physician of any kind and the physician gives us a diagnosis that is chronic in nature, I think a clinician who understands the psychological aspect of that is much better at bridging out resources to say, okay, well, this is something that you're going to have to adapt to. And like informing and educating, I think is the first step, and kind of normalizing this is likely going to be hard to adapt to. And to just accept. And sometimes, gosh, in any kind of world, right? Like when I work with people who have struggled with infertility, right? Like there's there's something about having to grieve and accept and to work with that. And I think doctors, physicians who are much more aware of holistically, like you said, of the impact of something. And it's not then just about certainly therapy and, the impact of their own identity and health in that regard, but it's how to get connected with resources to compensate. So part of this is also still building confidence. So it's like making up for a loss here, but what are the tools out there? What are the resources out there to compensate for all of this? And so hopefully physicians are getting better at looking past just the diagnosis. It's more about, even when somebody comes to see me for any condition, I'm like, okay, past diagnosis, what's really going to come from this? And how to compensate for it, how to build mastery given this condition. And so it's a matter of what's like accepting what is changing And in that acceptance process, it's about, okay, well, what also kinds of resources are out there? And I do think you mentioned some therapists on that the November 11th call, which I would imagine would be wonderful. I think therapists who are very aware, even from their own experiences or from a loved one, of connecting even those resources to know what's in the area. Because that's also, there's a psychological aspect called building mastery. And it's doing something that's challenging but capable. How to figure out, like, if it's an Uber ride, how to figure out what's possible to compensate for, some vision loss in there. So I think part of it is like word of mouth, honestly, like who has a good doctor, right? Who knows that aspect of mental health. I know, for me, I know even just pediatricians, primary care doctors in the area here in Cincinnati that I know that they know much more about mental health. And so any physician who just focuses on one thing misses the boat because they compartmentalize so much. But the doctors who know, okay, this is multidisciplinary. What is really going on? Is this, how much is sleep involved with this? How much might be affected by this? So I think really sometimes it can be word of mouth, but also looking at credentials, maybe calling and asking what their experience is on a holistic level. It involves, I think, people being more aware of the value of that to know to ask for that.
Thank you. Any other questions from anybody on the call?
You brought up a lot of good points. It took my brain to a lot of different areas, but and it is for sure not one size fits all, and it probably depends on what support structure do you have at home.
Yeah.
When we're faced with this diagnosis, and I say we, I mean my experience is probably not that different than most, and unfortunately that still happens today, and that's why I'm involved with professional outreach. But um, I was still 20/20 with glasses or contacts, so I'm helping out um, a cardiologist who's doing a study of different cholesterol treatment drugs and general eye health, and they needed patients for this study. And like, sure, all right, I'll do it. You get a thorough eye exam, and you're helping us out. Like, okay, well, all of a sudden, this ophthalmologist calls in somebody else, and nobody's really saying anything, which is usually not good. So doc, what's going on? Well, we think you have something called retinitis pigmentosa. I'm like, oh, what's that? Well, it's a degenerative disease that leads to blindness. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound too good. What do we do about that? Well, there's really no cure or treatment. Like, okay, well, when will that happen? Well, we don't really know, but why don't you just come back in a year or so and have a nice day? And that's it. And you walk out the door. And I'm driving home thinking, like, what just happened?
Right.
So again, but unfortunately that still happens, as I said, this happens today. So having the support structure at home, having Peggy that I can talk to, she's like, you what? So again, talking through, now what do you do? But unfortunately with this disease, it's a moving target. So just when we feel like we've adjusted to, all right, we've mastered this pretty well, then it moves again. And like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that's not so easy. We better figure out another way. But it's knowing that, kind of knowing what's coming, that is a great resource. And we've got a group. There's, I don't know what, 5 or 6 of us in a group text. Somebody named it the Blind Guys, and so Tim and Dan are on here, a couple of us. But just to throw out, hey, this happened to me. Or what do you do in this occasion? I won't get into too many examples, but it's a learning experience for all of us. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. This is Tim. Yeah, I think to build on what Jim said, I think it's interesting because the professional outreach group sort of was born out of from years ago, from early chapter president calls we used to do. It came up that this was a common recurring theme that people were being diagnosed and not being told what to do, not being given any hope, not being given any direction. And so I think we felt the need for some grassroots effort to get out there and talk to doctors. And that's kind of where I think it started and has grown into something much more meaningful in terms of a serious commitment from the foundation to understanding. And I think this idea that we're now incorporating mental health and recognizing the importance of that, um, I think is exciting in a lot of ways, and that um, again, building on what Jim was talking about, I think everybody on this call probably knows, except for you, Jennifer. We did one of our chapter events probably 4 years ago. We did basically a roundtable panel discussion moderated by a blind psychologist who you may have known, Michael Lickstein. Um, and we had four couples, and it was a young married couple, an older married couple, a mother and
I
daughter.
would have been the older married couple.
Yeah, that's right. And you were. And then
Older now.
and then two friends. And it was all a discussion about caregivers and partners and people who help us with all this and the importance of that. And how much that impacts our mental health and just having that support. Where would we be? And for those people who don't have that, where are they? I mean, what do they do? So there's a lot of those things. I think that opening up that discussion, having it more frequently is so critically important. And that support structure that we have with the blind guys and those things are kind of born out of it shows the importance of it because it wasn't an organized thing where we said, "Hey, let's put together a group where we just started doing it because we all felt the need to do it, and it just happened." But um, I think I had one other point. In just I'm curious, Jennifer, what your exposure to this might have been and what your thoughts are on it. As a bit of a departure, but I bring this up because it comes up fairly frequently, and it's something that just came up recently through, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Molly Burke, but she's a pretty high profile social influencer who has RP and was blind, legally blind at 14, is now I think 28. Just came out with a book and her memoir, and she's really interesting in how she addresses some of the issues she runs into. And social media has been, one of the big things. And I think we all at some point encountered some ugly sides of social media. And I, as a photographer and an artist, am frequently, or I should say occasionally at least, the question comes up like what the doubt, like how can you can't be blind because how can you take these pictures? How can you paint? How can you do these things if you can't see? They don't understand the spectrum. They don't understand how my vision loss is different than Jim's or Dan's or Michelle's or anybody else's who would be on this call. It's all different. And I know that Molly, I saw a post just yesterday where she was talking about how she was on a podcast who I believe somebody who I believe is a psychologist or psychiatrist, and um, that somebody in the comments stated that people with disabilities are just a burden on society.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Nice.
So those are the kinds of things that I think some of us hear and deal with, and it hurts to hear it for anybody, let alone yourself. And I'm wondering how social media, what impacts you've seen from it for those of us who are dealing with something that's invisible to most people and is misunderstood.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Hmm. Boy, it's like social media exists, of course, for a reason. There's some good to connect people, as we all know. It's a matter of what people go on social media for, and how they feel when they're done scrolling. There's so much, right? Like when you're in a not so good place, going on social media is probably not the place to go because that's the highlight reel for everyone. I do appreciate when people, especially podcasters, like have been a a growing thing, like even for some of my own interests as well. But there requires, I think, boy, it's still ethics. There's still boundaries. There's still, disseminating information that's correct, because you also have people on there who, like, I can't tell you enough about TikTok diagnoses. We see it a lot with autism, for example, but people who think that they have something and then they have all these things, and then people come in and saying, I just need a diagnosis. This is what I think. And so boy, it can be really dangerous.
Mhm.
Right. And so what's really tough is, gosh, I wish that there was like one of those, public warnings like they have on cigarette boxes, right? Like warning, like the information you will find on social media might not be true. And now in the era of AI and everything else, it's like, even my dad is older, and sometimes like I see how he has been a victim of like phishing and everything else. And then I feel like I have to now parent my dad and educate him. I'm a little bit more aware of what to look for, but like anything that you might see, online does not necessarily mean that it's true. Or if you see something in AI and you see this visual and you think it's true, there's so much falsity, falsified information that's put out there. So I think part of that, is I think how to connect with people who are supportive. But when somebody out there, I think that that's also the risk, right? Is when you are on social media and you could be with a very supportive group, but if it's open and if it's an open forum, which in some ways is a wonderful thing because it connects more people who are really seeking that out. But then you have people who are just not happy themselves, and they just find the need to somehow go online and, make nasty comments. And what's
Have
tough
you
is,
seen with patients, have you seen um, significant change in what they're coming in to talk to you about and how they're influenced by what's happening in social media?
oh, well, just because yeah, absolutely. But this has also been a phenomenon among adolescents, teenagers, for like, since really, like, if you look at the inception of like iPhone, but then Facebook, there was MySpace. If anybody remembers MySpace before Facebook, and yes. And what's fascinating is that just on a universal level, you can also see the spikes in like adolescent depression, but also suicides. And when Facebook would come out and you would see a spike, and then when, Instagram. So it's, oh boy, like talk about adolescent development. And that's where my thing is, our universal need is to belong and to be accepted. And when then adolescents go online, I'm saying adolescents, and I'll get to it. It's like it just kind of goes forward. But when adolescents seek validation in themselves, and so they go online and then they determine, okay, how many likes and how many posts and how many, flattering comments might I get. I also work with teenagers, honestly, who really struggle. Gosh, even young adults, I'm just going to say this, is that they struggle so much with connecting in real life that the vulnerability of the connection, which is vulnerable, right? Like learning how to date or learning how to be attracted to somebody, learning how to have a crush, like that's all a part of like social immaturity of what people experience. I've had people easily go online and talk with strangers much more easily than what they do to connect. And so that at any age can be an escapism from the vulnerability of connecting with somebody in real life, if you will, and going online and connecting with people they don't know. There's a lot of people who are much more comfortable sharing and everything with people they don't know. We also see that in comments. How many people would say a nasty comment that they would never say to somebody in person. And so it's unfortunate. So there's quite a bit of culture that I've seen for years, honestly, since social media has been a thing. And I absolutely have seen it in adults of, putting something out there and determining their worth or the worth of their post by how much it's liked or commented on and that kind of thing. So it can start in adolescence, but if somebody doesn't really mature out of that, it can absolutely continue through adulthood. There's absolutely adults who connect better online, that they really don't communicate and socialize in person. And so they become like hobbits, but they're connected virtually, but that's what it is that virtually there's a lot of benefits. But if it's the replacement fully for connection with others in real life, like in daily life, out and about, then that's a concern. It's a big problem across any age, honestly.
Yeah. The discussion of social media of all ages, all, people in general. That's a huge topic that we could probably talk about for hours and hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be very challenging, I think, for all all groups, all cultures, all subsets, all people, all ages. It's just, I don't know, moderation, right? That's what I try to tell my
and absolutely. And I usually, what I recommend people to do is, before going on social media, thinking about what's my mental state right now. What am I looking? Am I just passing the time? Am I sad? And so I'm going to go look at what other people are doing and then be even more sad that I'm missing out. Or am I going on there for resources? I need a new idea for a restaurant, and I know this person always goes, or there's this group or this group, and so I'm going to use that as a resource. So when it's used as a resource, I think it can be really, really wonderful. But if it's a place for people to just, find places to just be negative and feed off of the negativity, the way that I look at it is, if somebody is commenting like that, they're not coming from a happy place.
Right.
Yeah.
Agree. Well, we have about 10 minutes left in the session. Jennifer, thank you so much for your presentation. It was such a wonderful overview, and appreciate you coming on to share. And certainly, if anybody on the call or watching the recording would like to know how to get connected, please email us. Professional outreach. So it's po@fightingblindness.org. Or of course, you can email me, Michelle Glaze, or Chelsea directly, or Jim or Tim, I'm sure, could get you connected for more information about Jennifer's resource and how to get connected with her for mental health support. I do want to see if anyone on the group has any announcements about any upcoming events or anything that might be of interest to others in Cincinnati and the blind or low vision community that will be coming up over the next couple of months before we move on.
Well, we just got our new community manager just a couple of days ago. So we're just kind of getting ramped up with him, and hopefully we can get some things in the works. And Dan, I don't know if there's any scuttlebutt about social events.
Susan Farber and I are talking tomorrow evening to see what would make sense to do, hopefully before the end of the year or very early next year.
Good. I know we have a list, Michelle, a list of things that we have talked about over the past couple of years that we would like to do as some of our vision connections. But that with a community manager in place now, we can start to work toward those goals and have more to report later. But as always, anybody out there who does see this, who's peripherally involved or hasn't been involved and has some interest, we'd always love to have them reach out to us, get connected, participate, join in the fun in our leadership or our chapter in any way. We just had our vision walk here about a month ago, and a month ago almost to the day. And it was, another successful 20th walk. And yeah, just love to get more people involved. I'd love to see a lot more people on these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I want to thank Jennifer again. She was our featured speaker for our kickoff, and it's phenomenal. It's just, obviously, it's why we wanted her back here, I'm sure, but very good. My next door neighbor is a psychiatrist, and his wife's a psychologist. but he focuses on adolescents too, and so it's been extremely interesting for me to live next door to two people with so much insight and um, who have watched me and have helped me through so much over the past 11 years. And I appreciate what you guys do. It's, I think, critically important.
Thank you so much. Well, I personally want to thank this team for all that you do at a local level and beyond to support not only the Foundation Fighting Blindness and research, but also the blind and low vision community in Cincinnati and surrounding areas. Thank you all for being here. Our next Cincy Source will be in January. We will come up with the date and time and share that out. The more the merrier. So please invite a friend, colleague, or share on social media, as we talked about, to get more people involved in Cincy Source. Just a reminder, the Foundation Fighting Blindness is the global leader in driving retinal degenerative disease research, with about 50 clinical trials underway in a variety of different therapeutic modalities, including gene replacement therapies, neuroprotective strategies, gene editing strategies, cell-based therapies, and optogenetics. There are a lot of reasons to be hopeful for the future insight-saving research. Check out our website, fightingblindness.org, to learn more about all that's underway in the field in the way of clinical trials and emerging therapies. You can also tune in to the Eye on the Cure podcast to stay up to date on all that's ongoing. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate you hopping on, and we'll see you in a few months. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.